Hey, everybody, welcome to Top Chef Fantasy League, the podcast that has also grown over the last 12 weeks in Wisconsin. I'm your host and commissioner, Mike Campbell, and with me are my co-hosts here, Kato and Iffy Wadiway. We are coming to you live from not our usual studio. We are at Iffy's house. Iffy,
Yes,
thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, and thank you for putting up with accidentally taking so much of your time. I owe everyone dinner.
I'll take it.
Chefs.
I was going to say, that's okay, but then you're like, I'll get you dinner.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's one of my favorite love languages, like genuinely like taking friends out to eat, especially friends who love to eat. Because I know already just through doing this podcast, because I don't think we've had dinner together yet, that we'd go to a restaurant and be fine. Because I like to over order with friends just so we can try different things. But if you've ever been with someone who doesn't,
the worst.
Yeah, you're like,
it's the worst.
Why? No, we have to try everything.
I once went to dinner. Laura and I went to dinner with a couple. Won't say who they are. We know them. And they were like, we're going to order our own thing. And they ordered the same dish. They each got the same thing. And I was like, what? I'm never going to dinner with you again. Are you kidding me?
That always pains me. It does feel like, because sometimes I'll really want the same thing. And then, but even still, it's like, okay, can you get your second choice? And then you can have a little bit of both?
Yeah, yes.
What a waste.
Yes.
But
the other M was telling me that about her ex who did not like to share food.
That's a red flag.
Yeah.
Sorry. I would put up with that in my 20s, but now I'm like, that's simply not happening.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Look, we have a few announcements right up top. The first one, we've been saying this for a couple weeks now. After this show is done, we're going to move on to MasterChef. So this podcast is not going to go anywhere, but we are going to move from Top Chef to MasterChef, which has been going for a couple weeks now. Have you guys been watching the audition episodes?
I'm behind, but I'm going to start because Em is actually a huge fan.
There we go.
That's what I was going to say. With the partner check, we always talk about our partners and how into Top Chef they are. How into MasterChef is everyone's?
Wow. Yeah, I guess not as much. Definitely more started in the Top Chef zone, but when Dylan guest hosted, he talked about his love for Gordon Ramsay.
Yes.
So I think we've seen a few, and and then I've been following the MasterChef Instagram, so getting a little bit of tidbits. But I think I'm going to definitely hit it this weekend.
The MasterChef Instagram is helpful because they've been after every audition episode, they'll post like, here are 5 that we got picked in this episode, and then they'll tag them so you can like poke around their personal lives, and that is invaluable.
This is. What's fun about this now? I'm getting like really excited about it because if we look at Top Chef as like the NFL, like this, like MasterChef's going to kind of be like college football, where it's like less.
Sure. They're not professionals.
Yeah. It's not going to be about like what restaurants they've worked at and their style of culinary. It's going to be like, who are they as a person and how dedicated we feel they are to the cooking game.
Yes. Yeah. So as you can hear, we are very excited and passionate about moving from this season of Top Chef to our next season being MasterChef. So listen along with us, watch along with us, play along with us. It'll be a lot of fun. Last week I was talking about Marash or dondurma, the Turkish ice cream.
Yes.
And a day after we recorded, I texted you guys a link. There's a new restaurant in Long Beach that serves dondurma, and we gotta go.
I have a story.
Here we go.
Well, okay, so I didn't go, but my sister lived in Long Beach, and I happened to be hanging out with her.
Nice.
And her neighbors had just come back from there, and they showed a full video of getting served the ice cream. I don't want to totally spoil it, but because they have a little kid, they brought the little boy, and they did a whole trick with the ice cream with him.
You see that on Instagram. It's the guy holding it on a stick and flipping it around and stuff.
Yes, exactly. So that, and I was like, actually watching it, I was kind of like, oh God, I'm kind of glad I know this going in, so that they don't do that to me, and I'm like stressed about them dropping my ice cream I just paid for. So no, but it looked like really fun, and they like have these shiny barrels that they get them out of, kind of like it's quite a beautiful setup. So I'm excited for us to try it.
Okay, we'll take a field trip.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like now, with that now, I think we have to, when we're done, kind of try and set the date.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Are your cats okay over here?
It is every time I, like, if me and Em are doing our pod or like I start to do something, that's when they're like, now's a good time to start.
Yeah.
Scratching the scratch
It's
post.
good. Yeah, it's
Perfect timing,
good texture
Cats.
for
Yeah.
the background.
We talked about this on a previous episode. There was a rumor that Kristen Kish was going to be on the next season of
Oh,
The Traitors.
yes.
They released the lineup. No Kristen Kish in sight.
I scrolled through all the names looking
I did,
for her.
excitedly, just to see if it was going to happen.
It would have been very out of place, I
Yes.
think, and especially looking at like Selling Sunset and like Tom
Yeah.
Sandoval, like it would have been.
It would have
very
never happened.
strange.
It's like,
Yeah.
of course, she was never in the
Sure.
running. That would have
Yeah.
been insane.
I don't think she would want to do that.
And then an update on the fan favorite contest. We're currently in round 3 of fan favorite voting. Here are the finalists as of recording time: Dan, Savannah, Michelle, and Sue. No Amanda.
Wild.
No David Murphy.
Yeah, I know. No, David.
Sure.
I think, and this is it's respectfully, I am surprised at how well Dan's doing. Like, I
too, little, yeah.
Yeah,
because
okay.
Dan has grown on me. I really like him
For sure.
as a person, but also I feel like if I'm like the fan favorite, like Dan, like is good. He's just really good, but I don't think like he's been doing things where I've been like, I'm the biggest fan of him. Sue makes sense to me. Michelle makes sense to me. Savannah even like makes sense to me. But Dan, I think he's just like a solid chef that as we get closer to the final, I'm starting to ask myself is like, oh, has Dan been in it too long? Like to me, it's like Dan almost feels like he's past Top Chef. It's like
interesting.
every one of these chefs.
Yeah.
Like these are your peers, and now
Yeah.
like it very much has me like wondering, like, Dan. I know why as a chef you'd want to do the show, but I'm like, Dan, you might have been graduated already. But I guess this is you kind of getting into the class so that you can graduate.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but the fact that like, it kind of becomes arbitrary at a certain point, like who's a guest judge, who's a contestant, especially in like a certain region, right? And so, maybe, and especially hearing that, he's definitely been a chef for a while and he auditioned or submitted 13 times. Like that's sizable.
That's more often than not. The show is only 20 years old.
Oh, okay.
13 is more than half the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. All right.
Wow.
We'll see how far he gets in the fan favorite voting. Let's talk about this episode. Initial reactions, because this is our last episode in Wisconsin before we leave the state. How are you guys feeling reflecting on your time in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked the challenge. I think that the storytelling, I know that the Top Chef heads have been complaining on social media, but I think the storytelling in this season has been really fun. All the challenges have been exciting. These last 2 have been like my favorite quick fires back to back.
Yeah, I agree.
I like the taste test, and it also was funny to kind of see, and I think that's been the story of the season, is more options oftentimes than not is not better for you.
Yeah.
Lots of times it allows you to get muddled, and it keeps you from being like focused. And I feel like my general overall like thought of this episode is like I called it. Like I knew exactly. It made me feel more vindicated about everything I said last week. And it, once again, not a knock against. It's like, I think Manny is a phenomenal chef.
Absolutely.
But I think that what Top Chef is looking for, Michelle was giving that more than Manny.
Yeah.
Which is like creativity and out of the box.
Yeah.
Manny is a phenomenal. I cannot wait to go to his restaurant. But it is like he has been playing it safe till the bitter end.
Sure.
Yeah. And like, I also agree. I think like Michelle has dearly missed this episode, right? This was our first one without her.
Yeah.
Also, Wisconsin too, as a setting, like I, have talked about my experience loving Wisconsin.
Right.
I think it's kind of one of the first times where it's not just a city, right? Like we're doing the full
the whole
state.
state,
So I was kind of surprised we're done already in the sense of like we kind of hit a few places in the state, but maybe I don't know what I expected them to do, but maybe it was just like, oh yeah, I guess we and then we did a couple episodes where we were just in the kitchen, right? And kind of not really, maybe bringing in Wisconsin flavors and chefs, but not necessarily being on, in the field, as they say. But no, I mean, I think, again, it was a setting we hadn't seen before in Top Chef.
Which I love.
They explored, a supper club. They hit a lot of really great things that are Wisconsin Wisconsin specific. So it was cool to see. And, I'm very excited for the next location.
Me too. Yeah. I do feel like we're sort of entering an era of, it used to be, let's go to this cool city because everyone knows the cool stuff. Like, let's go to New Orleans. Everyone knows about the food in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Right.
And now we're sort of entering this era of like, we can do the show wherever we want. And what we're going to do is show you all the weird, interesting food stuff that is here.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though like the fish boil is not a nationally known thing in its own country, it's like, I'm glad they took us there and showed us a fish boil because now I know about the weird things that people eat in Wisconsin. You know what I mean? Torch. Now I know about Torch.
Now we know
Torch.
about Torch. Maybe a little too much. Huh?
He was having a good time.
All right, let's dive into the episode. We introduced Par Bartolotta, who is helping us with the last quickfire in Milwaukee, which is, as you said, the fan favorite blind taste test. You have to taste as many ingredients as possible in 5 minutes, correctly identify them. They said it was a 2-part quickfire with 2 cash prizes, so that is how I scored it for our purposes.
Got it.
If you guess the most, you get $5,000 in quickfire quick cash, and if you create the favorite dish, that's $10,000. So for part 1, Manny comes in first place. He guesses 23 of the 26 ingredients. Impeccable palate.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Insane. He credits his tongue scraper.
That was ridiculous.
It was so funny because then was like, why are they showing him scraping his tongue?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was like, this is going to have to do with
That's
something.
why.
Yeah,
Sure.
perfect call
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
I wrote down Savannah was almost legally blind in her left eye as a kid, question mark.
Yeah.
It feels like the kind of thing where I would have liked if they had put more in the edit, and I understand why they didn't. But if that came up at like a dinner party, I'd be like, speak on that for 10 minutes. I'd like to know.
Yeah,
I need
that's
the
the
whole
thing.
story.
Yeah.
I know people who, they wore an eye patch on the strong eye so that the weaker eye has to kind of catch up. So I think that's what she was.
You
like.
know people who do that?
I mean, who do that?
You're like,
yeah,
I know people.
I feel like I had friends as a kid
I'm friends
who
with
wore eye
pirates.
patch. Yeah. Wow, you guys didn't have eye patch friends?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of common in the sense of, if you have a one weaker eye, it'll only get weaker if you allow it.
Sure.
Just to
Yeah.
continue.
Okay. Also common if you're part of the Spanish Armada.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beware of scurvy.
Manny's getting married next summer. As soon as he said that, I was like, is that this summer? Because the timeline of the show, they
Yeah.
shot
Oh,
this last
definitely.
year. So I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, Manny and Molly, happy.
Congrats.
If it happened
Yeah.
or if it's going to happen, congrats. Yeah. It's exciting. He was talking about his fiance. He did not say, I miss my fiance.
Yeah,
So no points there. That's okay. Part 2 of the quick fire, they say, is the last quick fire that could come into play during the elimination challenge judging. So I guess that's not going to happen next week.
Yeah.
But our favorite dishes here were Savannah with her fried pork chop and a Caesar salad with cheddar in it, which Kristen said she liked. And I was like, okay, sounds gross, but sure. Laura with her mussel escabeche, and Danny with his grilled flank steak and okra. And I was like, Danny, no, never serve Tom okra.
Yeah. It was, but he didn't have many ingredients, and it was one that he got. So.
Yeah. So that worked out for him. At the bottom, we had Manny with the salmon crudo, and Dan with the worst steak and eggs that have ever been made.
Terrifying.
He said Dan himself said that there were shells in his eggs.
Yeah,
Oh
and
my
then they said there was a smell to it. Like,
yeah,
what does that even?
Yeah, someone said there was yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How do you make that smell bad?
Yeah, that's a little scary.
But everyone had a laugh about it,
Yeah.
It's
Sure,
okay.
he was self-aware.
So the winner there was Savannah winning $10,000, and Tom said at the very end, this belongs on a menu somewhere. So that is
Ooh,
an
ding,
extra
ding,
quarter
ding.
of a point there in our fantasy league. We move on to our final elimination challenge, which is to make a dish that exemplifies your culinary growth in Wisconsin. And like you said, they acknowledged wide open here. You can do whatever you want.
Oh yeah,
No
and,
guardrails.
and very different from the previous quickfire, where it was restricted to certain
Yes.
ingredients.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Savannah was thriving in that. She said she kind of liked some restrictions, but lo and behold, seems like she can do both.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Laura gets an extra 30 minutes for winning the last elimination challenge. Before they start, they all go eat at Ristorante Bartolotta. And I bring this up because there were a few interesting points that came up here. Manny was in law school before he went to culinary school for 3.5 years, which I was like, that's a long time to just kind of go like, never mind, I don't want to do this.
Right, isn't law school like? I mean, you could do night classes or whatever,
Sure,
so maybe it
yeah.
got extended. But I think you'd be done by then. But it's good he learned that that wasn't for
Yeah,
him.
he's like,
That
I
was
wanna
cool.
cook.
Yeah. He was like, I actually want to do something that makes people happy.
Yeah,
I was like,
which is nice.
Yeah,
I love that.
Very
Fair
sweet.
enough.
Okay, let's talk about each person because we have the time. I felt like in general, everyone was having a harder time than I would have thought
Yeah.
crafting their little narrative. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That seemed to come second for a lot of people,
Yeah.
or I feel like especially with such a wide open prompt, you'd think, okay, well, let's go story, and then that'll lead me to like what I need to buy, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like people, maybe they haven't really had this exact ask before, and so it was kind of like getting excited about, okay, we're shopping,
which is unusual because I feel like part of, if you're at the level of chef where you're like running your own restaurant, people do want like a little bit of narrative with your dishes, you know what I mean? Where it's just, even if it's just for the general menu to say like, this is the food that I grew up with or whatever, you know what I mean? And so to see a bunch of chefs be like, I don't know what story to tell with this dish, I'm kind of like, I'm shocked.
Also, like, it was very interesting because I feel like as much as we've heard people want redemption, this whole season, how few people actually did it and went with like, oh, I'm going to do the thing that I did well. And I was like, oh, I feel like that's not the move.
Yeah.
Which we kind of learned from one of the people, because if you don't nail it, then they have this comparison of like, well, I remember when you did this better.
Oh, yeah.
Versus like if you kind of tried and you didn't, like, I think in Danny's case, we were like, you really didn't get that. I think he really got pinged hard for saying it was subtle when it's not, which I know they're very like it feels like you don't know what you just served when you say that.
Right.
But and in a world, I'm like, I feel like that could very easily be semantics, because I think subtle could mean so many different things when it comes to food. In the end, like they still were like, it was good.
It's good.
Yeah,
a
and
good
I think,
miss.
Which like I think is his boon. Like even when Danny misses, it's still good, and that I think I've learned is so invaluable.
Yeah,
like even if you miss and it's good, you are oftentimes forgiven than when you miss and you serve that steak and eggs that Dan did.
Well, yeah, and I think also it really highlighted that if he had just said like something else, I think they would have had a completely different understanding.
Different story would have made it a good dish.
The amount of people who don't pick up on when Gail repeats something back to you that basically means like say something other than what you just said.
Yeah.
And him doubling down, I was like, no, that was your out, bro. That was your out.
Right. You think this subtle? I know. And then, it's like, abandon that word. Abandon.
Because I love when they did it with Sue, and Sue immediately was like, nope. Like immediate. He's like, I pick up what you're putting down.
Oh my God,
this is not
you are
that.
correct. I apologize.
This
Never
mind.
This is gnocchi. This is dumpling and eggs.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So, this was very, you're so right.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about him. Let's talk about Laura first. She did the lamb Monty with barbacoa sauce, which was the one dish I was like, I want this.
Oh, it looks
I feel
so
like
good.
it's been a few episodes since I've been like, I really want that. I feel like the last few episodes we've gotten into just like, oh, that really fit the challenge. I don't necessarily want it. This dish was like, I want that dish.
Yes.
It looked really, really good.
God, it was just in the like seeing how much skill it took.
Yeah.
I almost thought she would have had it, but we'll get to who did.
Sure.
And it's so clear why. It was like, this was a home run of a challenge for them, which like, those are always fun to see where you're like, I know there's multiple good dishes, but this person A+ did.
Yeah. Once she put her lamb in like a piping bag, I was like, that's some interesting technique. I've literally never seen that.
I tasted so bad.
Yeah, that was cool because they were just so tiny and delicate. It's like, ooh, how did that's the only way I guess to get the lamb in there.
Yeah, and she had a good narrative. She said her little growth story was she wanted to learn how to do less, which was on point because they, the editors cut back to some of her previous dishes where they're like, this is like 17 too many ingredients. And she was like, this one is simple, and she also. This wasn't in like the final presentation edit, but she talked about wanting to marry her like Middle Eastern influence and her Mexican influence. So this was like a Turkish dumpling with a Mexican sauce. And everyone thought it really worked. She did really well.
Yeah, something she hadn't done before.
Any other thoughts on Laura?
No, I think it was very good, and this is one of the few people's on this episode who really I think nailed the challenge, went with something that they felt like they didn't do well and did it better, even though hers was I think people don't like the judges themselves don't know the extent to which Laura meant it, because like when they're in the store even where it's like, oh yeah, this has been a point of contention,
right? And she's like, I'm gonna shop less.
Yes,
I don't need to buy all this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was like,
that was big.
I think that might have been some lost credit that kind of might have went over the judge's head, because it was more so between the chefs than it was with the actual like presentation of the food.
Yeah.
Oh wait, also if we're talking about Laura,
Here we go.
I noticed another like villain edit thing.
Oh wow! Okay.
Villain
watch.
Sorry, we're gonna reverse to the quick fire. But when they ran to go get their ingredients that they were allowed to use, post tasting,
I know exactly what you're
Danny
about to
grabbed
say.
for his tray, and then she was like on the opposite side of him as her tray, and then
She
reached
reached
across
across.
him,
Yeah, why?
Which was like either get on the other side, I guess, or like just
Wait 2 seconds.
Yeah, it was again Danny and Laura, right? Which we know
You're
they have the
right.
history.
Yeah.
It was very funny.
I can't believe I missed that. That's so funny. You're absolutely right.
I was surprised because I was like, oh wow, did maybe he kind of like get in front of her at first? So I reversed and then was like, no, I think she was like behind and then reached across.
Look, I love marriage, the sanctity of it, and wish the best on everybody's marriage. But if this turns to some weird like enemies to lover, where 2 years from now we find out
They're both married.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow,
That's
that
what I'm
would
saying.
be quite the turmoil there.
Yeah.
I can't
Quite
wait
the
to
drama.
read your fanfic on this
Oh
subject.
yeah. Don't worry.
And I know you can.
It'll happen.
I
It'll
got the
happen.
skills.
Speaking of Danny, let's talk about him and his soba cha mushroom broth, mushroom puree, and cod. The first thing I wrote down, he looked like he was having fun in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
He was dancing around, singing.
Yeah.
He loved it. Yeah, that was like one of the most. That's why I was kind of like, okay, maybe he's really. Though we've had a couple of these where he's quite confident and then it doesn't pan out, So I kind of took it as like, then maybe it won't pan out. But yeah, having a great time.
Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't produce a good. Well, like we said, it produced a good dish, but it was not subtle. And I feel like
Right, and the story wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
there.
You got to pivot your story.
Yeah, and I think too, like I want to say the two, our two tops for this elimination challenge, like they also have grown a lot in a way that I feel like we're able to track as an audience.
Yeah.
The judges can tell. Maybe Danny has too, but I feel like maybe it's a little less clear, because he's always kind of been
He was
strong.
good from the beginning.
Yeah, and like he's had some really good wins, but they were kind of in the middle. And then he would have to definitely work to figure out what that is, which I think he could totally have done.
Yeah.
But
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's a little murkier.
Because Danny is one of the rare chefs where he had, I think, less bad dishes to work from in that way. And even like when you're like the soba cha wasn't that good. I feel like that was like it wasn't like something I even remembered,
Yeah.
like, oh, Danny fucked up that soba cha. So like him being like, I guess this is the thing I'll focus on right now was very interesting.
I guess that's like the, heavy is the crown sort of like, if you're consistently good, then you have to be like, what's the one bad thing I did this season? I guess I messed up that tea. I guess I could do a better version of that tea.
Yeah.
And then he ended up making really good, like a really good dish. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's just he didn't, I
it's
don't
a
know.
really good mushroom dish, not a really good soba cha
Right,
dish.
right, exactly. They said the fish was lost in the dish, which is a bummer.
Yeah.
Speaking of fish, let's move on to Dan with his smoked walleye and gnocchi with a lemongrass, turmeric, and brown butter emulsion. He said his narrative was that he's learning to cook from a sense of place, so he used all these Wisconsin ingredients, but he refused to put himself in a box. He wanted to use global influence. Here's the first thing I wrote down. He was like, he got to Whole Foods and he was like, oh no, my whole dish is based on lemongrass. There's no lemongrass here. I'm like, you just came from a specialty shop. They said you're getting $150 to go to a specialty shop. Why didn't you go to an Asian market?
Oh yeah, I guess he just assumed they'd have lemongrass, which
Yeah.
is not
Poor planning.
always going to be the case.
Poor planning.
Also spelling out his story there, I'm like, I feel like there is something there in the sense that he's the local guy. It could be like, I started in Wisconsin, now I'm going to go to an international place, so I'm also using international global influence or something. But the way he said it was like, it was just more about a descriptor of him and his style.
Because he started the season being like, I cook Asian food and I live here. You know what I mean? It's like,
so he's always had that global influence.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, it's sort of again a tricky one where it was trying to it just didn't have like the growth element. I guess it was more of just like, this is who I am.
I think the people who landed on the bottom interpreted the challenge as take something you did wrong and make it better to show us how you can improve. But improvement is not necessarily the same thing as growth. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Sure.
I think the people who won sort of internalized the challenge more in terms of just like, in what ways am I different? Not necessarily what can I make better, but just like, how am I not the same person I was when I came into the competition?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I think also, just a little less of a literal interpretation. It was, Dan and Danny doing like more specific things that like this exact recipe I've done before versus,
and this is my
the
growth.
quality of it.
Yeah. So Dan oversmoked his walleye. No one really liked it. Moving on. Let's talk about Manny. with his snapper a la Veracruzana with creamy potatoes and saltines, which I almost was like, that's a store-bought ingredient, and then he brushed his little butter stuff on it. I was like, okay, that's been modified. That is not a store-bought thing. He wanted to cook this for a while. Back in week 10, this was his like, oh, I could cook this in my sleep. You know what I mean?
Looks like he got to wake up a little bit. Looks like he has to, because that fish was raw.
Okay. So twofold problem here. Let's talk about the raw fish first. Yeah. One of the judges hit the nail on the head where he's like, if you're bringing this dish and you're like, this is the dish I've mastered, and you mess up the protein,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's not good. And of course, I swear to God, it always ends up on Tom, in front of Tom for some reason. I feel like the producers are like, switch it around.
Yeah, the shot of Tom like bugging his eyes out when someone else is like, my fish is perfect. It was like, ooh, that is good TV.
I swear, there has to be someone back there like, oh, no, make sure Tom
Yes.
does that.
Oh, I mean, it's always him. It's so funny. And of course, he's, the craft guy. I just feel like he's always getting raw meat and raw fish.
Yeah, so I do feel like that's the part that Manny knew he fucked up. He was like, I know I served undercooked fish, and Tom was like, it wasn't undercooked, it was raw. But that's the part he'll own. The other part of his failing here was his narrative was that he wanted to reach back to his roots, which is when he felt the most comfortable in this competition, and keep honoring the cuisine of his people. And I was like, Manny, that's the opposite of growth.
Right.
Yeah. To be like, here's where I started. It's like, you're not, by definition, that's not growth. You know what I mean? He could have cooked anything not Mexican, and it would have gone over gangbusters, you know?
Right. Taking a chance.
Here we go.
But there's not been a single thing he's cooked this whole season that has not been Mexican.
Right.
That's I can't recall.
And once again, like I said, there is a way to do it. It's something that I'm not trying. I know it seems like I'm harping on it, especially so since that was my last chef in here, but it really is like just from a complete like as not even as a player in our game, as a like viewer and like a fan of all these chefs. I want them all to win. I'm like, that is the one thing. My one thing that I had about Manny, this whole thing is like, you're not infusing the two. You're just doing the thing, and like I think. It's because it excites me so much. Like I don't know if y'all went to it when it was here. And this is a completely different part of Latin America. I am going to say that, I know. But Cosita, where it was Peruvian, Japanese
I never got to go, but
it was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And then, you had the Kogi truck, which was like Korean and like, Mexican food. And I was like, that is like, I have such a soft spot for the fusion of like Mexican dishes into like other culinaries, and just even seeing like the heightened fine dining level of stuff. Like I was so hyped to see that for Manny, and feeling like I never really got the chance to do it is I think my one gripe, where it's like, I think you could have crushed just simply like delivering that. And I get it. I don't actually get it because I'm not a chef, but as someone who we work in creative fields we've been like in the pressure cooker, it's really hard to not go, well, I should do the safe thing. I should do the thing I know I can do. But I think we didn't get to showcase, how far you can go. And I feel like what I loved, and I think same soft spot as someone, my mom's from New Orleans, seeing like Southern takes on a lot of these dishes was super exciting to me. And I'm like, damn, I would have loved to know what like Michelle's growth dish would have been.
I know what you mean. I think about this in terms of acting a lot, where it's like, the advice you get, when you're like an acting 101 is like, be yourself. Because what directors want to see is like what you're going to bring to this role. Yeah. But I think that's sort of like incomplete advice, because really what it is just like, take that, the thing that makes you, what does that look like in this universe? It's like you have to bring what's special about you to whatever this project is. Yes. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what is your interpretation of this material? Yeah. It's not just like, what are you, period, in a vacuum all the time. And I think that's like the same thing, where it's just like Manny never brought his take on Mexican food to other food. It was always just like, here is my Mexican food.
Yes. Right.
Which is good.
That's a very good.
But it's not going to win you Top Chef.
Exactly. And that's a really good point. Like, I just want to reiterate how good it is for him to make it that far simply doing that.
Absolutely.
But it's like, But it is like, you're right. The thing that's going to win you Top Chef is that injection of it. Also, want to, I always like to shout out that, Mike is the audition king. So if you're an actor watching this, take that.
Thank you so much.
And
if you're a casting director, I don't know what you're doing.
If you're a casting director, let's get.
He's right
come
here.
on, it is slow as shit.
That's a very the infusion of both, and then also like I think. In this particular challenge, it was interesting. I wonder if people just got in their heads the minute that they heard
for sure.
open-ended,
yes.
make whatever. They're like, oh, I have to do what I'm best at. And if you nail that, sure, I think you could still be fine. But, in this case, it's also like kind of know your audience. And a lot of the guest judges obviously were from Wisconsin, wanting to see that reflected back. Like they were judges who had been there throughout the season, so they saw certain like snapshots of them. And I think we're kind of like disappointed when they didn't get like a shade of Wisconsin in Manny's meal. Yeah. And also the fact that like, it was the prompt specifically was growth in Wisconsin. So maybe, underlining Wisconsin a little bit more would have been smart. So that all the things are true. And then, I think also there's been, this was a decision, and we'll obviously talk about this later, but I think they were using all the experience with Manny over the last few episodes, to kind of make their decision at the end, don't you think?
Oh, you think they weighed in like
his
past
slightly,
performance? Sure.
Because and we'll get to this, but I think it might have contributed to that a bit.
Right.
It was like, you got to maybe prove yourself a little bit more than the rest.
Yeah. I was going to say, just because you brought up Cosita, you've eaten at Chifa, right?
Oh,
right here in your
baby,
backyard.
I love Chifa.
Love Chifa. Chifa's the best.
So good.
Have you been to Chifa?
No, I
You gotta
didn't.
go to
It's
Chifa.
close. Okay, nice.
Peruvian Chinese.
Yes.
Oh,
It's great.
shoot. Okay,
So
yeah.
good.
That sounds great.
Okay, so that leaves Savannah with her potato pave, burnt onion, cherry jam, chicken sauce reduction. Love the narrative.
Oh,
her narrative
really
was the potato has everything it needs, but to make it a pave, it just needs heat and pressure, and that's I have everything I need, and this challenge put me through heat and pressure. I was like, really spoken like a copywriter.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Like, it's been so hard not to mention this dish for so long because I wanted to wait till we got to her.
Yeah.
But this is
Speak on it.
The dish that really kind of like you said, internalized and thought about it. Everyone was focusing on what I did wrong. What's the bad dish? This is a philosophical idea where it's like, no, this isn't about a dish I made. This isn't about like something that I've done. It's the fact that being here has put pressure on me.
Yes.
Also, here's this very great technical dish that represents that.
Good story, good dish.
It's like, I was like A++. Like knocked it out the park. I can see why you won because and she was out first, so it was very hard to tell when you first saw it how much she nailed that part compared to everyone else.
Yeah.
Because even like with Laura's, which was really good, like I'm like, it still wasn't touching on like Savannah's like coming out, saying it, talking about it, walking. I was like, man, that is so concise.
Yeah. Just having a good 30-second speech. It's like it does wonders for the meal. You know what I mean?
Oh, that was great. And I loved seeing the little rectangle slice out of the whole, I think it kind of reminds me of like in Ratatouille. I think I brought it up before, but in Ratatouille, they just take the scoop out of the little bit and put that in the center of the plate. Like, it's like you see this big potato dish and then you're like, oh,
tiny
just a tiny little
touch.
sliver.
Yes.
And it's so, and then that was the star. I thought it was very just beautiful looking on top of, the fact that you're right. It was sort of like, oh, shoot, she did it right. Okay, great. Let's see who else can do it right. And then like nobody got even close.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's hard to go first and then just be the best because then the rest of the time you're like, this doesn't live up to that.
Right. Yeah. I mean.
She does. Oh, okay, I just wrote down they liked that she put the Wisconsin cherries and cheese in there. She does get an extra quarter of a point because she did say pave you usually make overnight. Yes. I'm doing it in 3 hours.
Yes,
which is one of our fantasy points there. There were no top dishes this time. There was no judges table, so no one gets those points. They just declared a winner cold.
Yeah,
and it was Savannah, who points out she has the most wins in Wisconsin. She is the one to beat now.
Yeah.
I hadn't counted that.
Yeah, I was too lazy to go back and do the math, but I trust her. I believe it.
Yeah. And I mean, all of them have been within the last few episodes, I think, right? She's really like, grown to this.
This has really been like, she might be like the surprise, like, star, which is not like it's, she did horrible, but I feel like she was out of the spotlight when you had, people like, Danny and and
Rossica, the heavy hitters.
These heavy hitters. She was kind of lost in the background of that. And she's just kind of risen up as this like champion.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah.
With an injury.
Yeah.
With an injury, no
Oh,
less.
LeBron James type stuff right now.
That's
true
right.
greatness.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to bring it up again, but I do think like we picked her last.
I know,
right? So
I
it
know.
shows us
Egg on
like,
our face.
We didn't, you can easily underestimate people, but I do think that this is a common thing of Top Chef. You have people who just really like. Exactly as she said about her dish, under the pressure, they just really like blossom.
Yeah.
And we love that she also has tried, she's kind of a nerd about Top Chef. So she has tried a lot of these challenges that her like boyfriend.
Before the blind taste test, she was like, I didn't try this one at home, but I was so excited.
Yeah, which one, like, I didn't even know it was a possibility.
That's the one thing I think you should have done.
Because she did so badly on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, now, well, I guess it didn't really matter though, because the person who won that part.
Yeah, exactly.
As we know.
Yeah, it gave her a smaller box to work in, less ingredients, makes you a better chef. At the bottom, we got the boys, Dan, Danny, and Manny, who, like we said, they all did riffs on a dish they did earlier in the season. I think that was just sort of the wrong tack to take. When they're doing deliberations, they said that Danny had a good quickfire, Manny had a bad one, Dan had an awful quickfire, but the question was, is Dan's quickfire worse than Manny's raw elimination challenge fish?
And then, so that's where I was kind of thinking, look, I think Dan's was so bad that I think he could have gone home, but maybe they were kind of bringing in some Manny history of like, he hasn't risen.
I feel like raw food is just always kind of a death wish.
Yep.
Like I think that is the
on
one,
any cooking show.
Yeah, that is like the because on the one hand, it's like just I think very amateur, I think, for a lot of things, but I think on the most important thing when it comes to that, it is like a health issue. Like you can ruin a restaurant by like sending out raw food.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we eliminate Manny. Manny packs his knives, goes home, and he owns it. He's like, look, I served raw fish in the final 5. That's just, I get it. I'm going home.
Yeah.
To Tom.
Yeah. To Tom, no less. Yeah. I have just a small note here for discussion. I feel like the audience at home has really turned against Manny in the last couple episodes.
I mean, I've seen a lot of Instagram comments that are just like, why is he still there?
Yeah, exactly.
He hasn't done it, because I think it's the kind of thing where like, actually, he did win like the first episode as we mentioned, but like we just haven't seen him win. And then they talked about the power bottoms early on, so we kind of have like associated that with him.
Yeah, he had that like burn.
Yeah. So maybe it's just been a long time since we've seen him really like earn his spot at the top, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's the fatigue. And I think honestly, Michelle leaving before him was
it was Michelle.
I
that
think
was a big one.
Definitely is. But also we have to take the audience's thoughts with a grain of salt since they have Dan winning the fan favorite. So,
he hasn't won yet.
Yeah.
But true.
We'll see how that works out. Next week, we're doing a Caribbean cruise to Curacao. A Top Chef first is the cruise. I do want to point out they kept saying that these 4 are heading to the finals, but as we stated in our first episode during the draft, we are defining the finals as the last episode.
Yes.
So it's whoever makes it to the final 3. That's who's getting those points. Sierra, you've got 2, I've got 2. You've got the boys, and I've got the girls going into these last 2 episodes.
This is true, but man, have the girls been crushing.
They've been crushing.
I'm not feeling too... I mean, we'll get into the points this episode, which was a heavy Cabal episode.
Yes, very happy about it.
But I gotta say, Laura and Savannah especially have some really killer momentum, and it's been really cool to see. My Danny and Dan, they used to, we saw a clip of them being like, we're getting comfortable at the top, but this episode, they were both on the bottom.
That's right.
As we know, it could change overnight, and it kind of did in some ways. So, I want them to step up. Get back up there.
Yeah.
Earn you some points.
I know. Come on. Get back in there. We'll see. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of points, let's do our points breakdown. Reminder, you can find our scoring rules on our Instagram at Top Chef Fantasy League. On this episode, the quickfire favorite dishes were Savannah, Laura, and Danny. That's a half point each. The quickfire winner were both Manny and Savannah, because it was a 2-part quickfire. They each get 1 point. There was no judges table. The elimination challenge winner was Savannah. That's 2 points. Episode sweep bonus. This is the first time this has happened this season, so we haven't had to do this, but Savannah won both of the
Amazing.
quickfire and the elimination challenge. That's an extra point there. Tom said the Savannah's quickfire belongs on a menu. That's a quarter of a point. Savannah said this usually takes overnight to make. That's a quarter of a point. So in this episode, if you gain 0 points, you have no more players left. But hang in there. The sous chefs are coming.
Yeah,
you can still
I
get
would
another
bet-
couple
yeah,
points at the end.
Yeah.
It could happen. And maybe while they're sous chef and they're like, I miss my kids. And you just,
Oh gosh,
just
yeah.
run
Say it
through.
a few times. And
Sierra, you gain a half a point. Not nothing.
hey,
But
I'll take
I
it.
gained 6.5 points thanks to
Oh
Savannah.
my God.
That's
Wow.
mostly Savannah, all in one
Yeah.
episode.
wow.
Thank you, Savannah, for earning me so many points. So our leaderboard as of right now, Iffy in last place at 20.5 points. I am at 43.25. You are at 48.25. I'm within 5 points of you.
I mean,
Wow.
this was exact because when I was always so far ahead, we would talk about, it's possible, and possible, but this is the kind of episode
I'm really
where I was
closing the
like,
gap.
Yeah, that
Yeah. I
would
can
take to
taste
turn
it.
it around.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We'll see.
there
Yeah,
you
one
go.
more Monster Savannah episode.
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
there.
Yeah.
something about that momentum. It
Yeah.
might happen.
And by the way, at the top of the season, we never decided what the prize or the punishment
Yeah.
was. So we
No,
should
yeah.
probably settle on that soon.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah.
I would
Good
have
thing
to
you
assume
didn't
that
ask
at
me.
least part of the prize is draft order for the MasterChef season.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
definitely,
An
yeah.
advantage in the elimination.
Right.
challenge.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah.
You'll get that.
Any other thoughts before we close out?
Oof, I'm excited to see this cruise. Like,
I know,
are there
yeah.
going to
Yeah.
be, some seasickness?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was
Yeah.
like, who's going to be seasick?
I do feel like whoever works at like Princess or Carnival or whoever this sponsor ends up being who landed this account is getting a huge promotion.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
I feel like ever since the pandemic, people are like, we don't want to go on a cruise
Oh, gosh.
anymore.
Yeah, I don't wanna
And this
be
is sort of
stuck.
like it's a twofer. It's one, cruises are cool, and two, cruise food is good because
Oh, yeah.
I feel like previously the thought was always cruises have like mediocre food.
Yeah.
This is a real big PR boon for them.
It really is because I did Joko Cruise, and in the kitchen it was like, such and such James Beard Award winning chef's
Oh.
food. And I was like, yeah, but how like legit is this? And when I saw them there, I was like, oh, I guess it must be pretty legit. Who like,
Yeah.
but it works. It works.
It works.
Oh, yeah.
As long as it's good, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
If you have any thoughts or suggestions, drop us a line on Instagram at Top Chef Fantasy League. If you're doing your own Top Chef Fantasy League, tell us how you're doing because we're in the end game now.
Yeah.
So let us know if you're winning or if you're losing. For full unedited episodes, you can check us out on YouTube. Thanks again to my co-hosts here, Kato and Ifiwadiwe. We'll be back next week. Don't forget to start watching MasterChef Wednesdays on Fox. So this year on MasterChef, it's MasterChef Generations.
Ooh.
And so far, we've got our millennials and we've got our boomers.
Oh, baby.
And coming up this week, we're going to learn about Gen Z, and then the last audition episode will be Gen X.
Oh,
Wow.
Oh, Gen X always getting put last.
yeah.
That's their big problem. Top Chef Fantasy League is hosted and produced by Mike Cablon, Sierra Kato, and Ifiwadiwe. Our theme song is composed by Dylan Van Auken. No special thanks to Jarvis Johnson. We used our own board this time.
Yeah.
Get out of here, Jarvis. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Top Chef Fantasy League.